Her name is Mikayla Koble. She was born and raised in Minot, North Dakota. She attended North Dakota State University and earned a degree in Human Development and Family Science. Mikayla is a lifelong Catholic and has just finished 4 years with Focus Missionaries. Focus is the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, and if you're not aware of them, they're doing great work in the new evangelization on college campuses. Mikayla led Bible studies and worked to evangelize students on the campuses of the University of South Dakota, and for the last 3 years, right here, close to us in eastern Michigan. She is forming a nonprofit ministry called CORE to continue her evangelization work. We are blessed to have her here at Our Lady of Good Counsel. We welcome her to share her testimony of God's healing power in the Eucharist. Welcome, Mikayla.
So I think it's easy for us to look at Scripture and just think of it as stories from thousands of years ago. So I'm actually going to use a passage from Mark's Gospel to tell my story. And so the passage, it's from the Gospel of Mark, verses 25 through 34. You might be familiar with it. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." So this woman, it says that she was suffering for years, that she endured much under many physicians. And similarly in my life, in 2007, when I was 16 years old, I was driving home one night, and I was T-boned, broadsided, by a vehicle that was going between 60 and 70 miles per hour. I was hit on my driver's side, and it was not expected that I was going to survive the crash initially. So that was a miracle in itself. And I was taken to ICU. I was in a coma. I had a laceration on the back of my head, some severe bruising, a collapsed lung, and my other lung was partially collapsed. I had 4 fractures in my pelvis, multiple breaks in my spine, and a couple of collapsed spinal discs. I got it all. So I wasn't doing so well. But after a couple days, my condition started to stabilize. They still weren't sure if I would ever wake up or have full brain function and ever walk again. But a few more days, so I spent about 5 days in a coma, and actually only 9 days total in the hospital. And so I was sent home in a wheelchair and a back brace, and a lot of confusion and a lot of pain. But it was only about 2 months, and I was able to begin walking again. But again, a lot of chronic pain, particularly in my back. And it was a really rough time. And I kept going back to doctors and physical therapists, and they couldn't really figure a lot of things out or really help my problems. And so, like this woman, I suffered for years and endured much under many physicians. And so then it goes on in Scripture and says she had heard about Jesus. And as was mentioned, I grew up Catholic. I went to a Catholic school for K through 12. I'd heard about Jesus, sure. But transubstantiation was just like another vocab word in school. It didn't really apply, I guess, to reality for me. It was just stories. And so then, a couple years after the crash, it was my freshman year of college, and I remember my roommate just casually mentioning the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus present in the Eucharist. And that wasn't really something that I had heard before. I'd heard like the body and the blood, but just her saying soul and divinity really struck me. And I didn't understand, but I started to see that I was missing something. And over the year, through other encounters of the Eucharist, wanted to understand more. And so I began attending daily Mass, trying to gain a deeper understanding and wanting to deepen my faith in his true presence, because I finally acknowledged that I couldn't do it on my own, that I wasn't just going to come to an understanding. And so I began praying, I began forming a relationship with Christ. And as it goes on to say, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. I remember praying with this at some point in college, and with what I had heard about Jesus, I thought, well, if Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist, then that means to receive him is to touch him. And she says, Lord, like, if I touch him, I will be made well. And so I essentially prayed, Lord, I believe that you are able to heal me through the Eucharist. If you desire it, you may heal me. And nothing happened. Years went by, I finished college, nothing happened. And it wasn't through a misunderstanding I had on who Jesus is and what the Eucharist is. But it was a block in my heart, because yes, Jesus wanted to heal me, but I didn't want him to heal me. After coming close to him, after the crash, I realized how merciful him saving me in the crash was, because I wasn't at a great point in my life, and I didn't really believe in him and his love. And so I felt guilty that he saved me. I felt guilty for when other people died in crashes, and I was like, why didn't you just take me? I deserved it. And so I was holding on to that lack of mercy for myself. And instead of seeing the mercy just in him saving me, I thought that the crash itself was an act of mercy, because I thought maybe I wasn't supposed to exist from the beginning, and the crash was put in place so that I would suffer and make up for it. So I had this really skewed perception, and I didn't want to be healed. I wanted to suffer because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. But by his grace, I continued to go to him, and he continued to form my will to his, and make his desire my desire. And so after several years, through a series of events, I came to desire healing, because I realized that though he could bring good out of my suffering, that I was actually prohibited from fulfilling the will that he had for me, that I was being prevented to do it. And so I asked for healing. I started to pray for healing. I considered medical help. I had people praying with me. And then, as it goes on, it says, immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. So I was praying for healing, and about 2 months in, it was May of 2013, so just 3 years ago, 3 years and 3 days ago, I was in Rome on a pilgrimage, and we had Mass in the room that St. Ignatius of Loyola died in, who was a close friend of mine. And I received the Eucharist and went back to my spot, and just kneeling there, giving thanks to God for the journey that he had brought me through, for the mercy that he has had on my life. And I just suddenly realized that there was no pain in my back. It had been 6 years since the crash, and so it was obvious that there was no pain. It was weird. I wasn't used to it. I had no idea how long that it would last, but I knew that it was miraculous, that he was fulfilling the promise that he had made to me the 2 months prior and pretty much every day since. And I wasn't sure what to do after that. Kind of like the woman, I was a little, trembling, like, I don't know what just happened, but I guess I'll keep going. And so it goes on. She goes before Jesus and he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." And so the next day, after I was healed, I actually hiked a mountain in Assisi. And it was the same mountain that I wasn't allowed to hike 4 years prior to the healing. And I remember being really bitter about it at that moment. Like, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's not fair. I'm never going to get to do this again. And then I did. And then, I went home. I started being able to run again, painless, first time in 6 years. Playing soccer, I joined a intramural league, which was my favorite sport, and I hadn't really been able to play. And I just started living my life the way that I was meant to live, and learned a lot about God and his desire for us to be healed, to be who we were meant to be. I'm very grateful that he is faithful to his promises, and that he doesn't just respond, like he responds in a way that will most fascinate us. Like, he could have healed me at any time, but he waited until it was what I desired, and then he did it in the room that my best friend died in Rome. And so and then I got to hike a mountain the next day. It's a good story. And it had taken me several years to allow him to form my will to his, but once he did, it was very simple. I guess more afterward stories. So it's been 3 years. I still don't have pain in my back. Last summer, if you're familiar with El Camino de Santiago, I hiked 225 miles across Spain with a backpack, and I was doing great, probably in better shape than a lot of the group I was with. And it's been amazing. And something really important that I learned is that God was always present. He's always been in the Eucharist. And I'd been presented in front of the Eucharist my entire life. But he waited for me to reach out in faith, like the woman, the hemorrhaging woman who reached out to touch his cloak. And so I just want to encourage you all to just allow him to show you himself. I tried to grow in understanding, but it was, like Father saying, is the experience that can fix us. And so that is all I have.
Thank you, Mikayla. We wanted to have Mikayla speak because we wanted to know that although we have this beautiful exhibit of all these miracles that have happened many years ago, Jesus still heals in the Eucharist today. Jesus is still present today. Jesus still loves us today. And so we thank you, Mikayla, for sharing how Jesus healed you through the Eucharist.